I'd like to just introduce our next speaker. Marta Karlik-Neale is a Nelson-based Tonkin and Taylor Sustainability and Resilience Principal with over 20 years' experience. Her work focuses on climate risk, adaptation pathways, carbon accounting and decarbonisation strategies for the corporate sector and local government. Marta is passionate about the concept of ecosystem services and an advocate for nature-based solutions in the climate adaptation and mitigation work. Marta will share lessons from the Wellington Resilience Strategy on the role of ecosystem services in adaptation and decarbonisation. Please welcome Marta.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Marta Karlik-Neale hau, no whakatū hau. I feel very much like an imposter here right now, having followed really great presentations and not being a landscape architect myself. I come actually from the engineers, which you often probably struggle with. A lot of my colleagues are what we call pipe engineers, probably a worst nightmare. But what I'm hoping to do is maybe to share a bit of a language that is used in the companies like Tonkin and Taylor, and a bit of ideas about how to build a business case. Because as my introduction said, I do love nature-based solutions. I think they must be the large part of the solution to our climate change crisis. And so while I admire people like our first presenter with the heart who can go out there and convince people to do those big, amazing projects, a lot of work happens in the background, and you need to talk to finances, and sometimes use slightly different language. So my slides are not as beautiful, I apologize, but they might be useful. I hope they'll be useful. So I just wanted to start the presentation with just something that you all know. Nature is an expert on adaptation. When we talk about adaptation, leaving nature out of that is a big mistake because it has survived many, many climate change cycles in the past. And so in my presentation, I'm looking back into what are the things that we can learn from nature when we're putting together our adaptation plans. So most of the adaptation plans these days, most of the methodologies that are out there have got the circular diagrams, which indicate that it should be an iterative process, which seems reasonable, seems like something that would happen in nature. But what I wanted to share with you is what it often looks like practice. So I have been involved in a number of projects that apply what's called dynamic adaptive policy pathways, which is the currently gold standard around how to develop those plans in the great uncertainty of climate change. And what I have seen is a much more linear process where we start off with understanding the hazard and spend most of the budget there, mapping the floods and doing things like this. And then we try to look, that's where you spend the rest of the budget, is look at what is at risk. This is where the asset managers come in and they start looking at all of the pipes and roads and buildings that potentially will be impacted by those hazards. At that point, it's time to finally go out to the community and start talking about what's called in this methodology thresholds. So what bad looks like. What is the worst scenario that we're still prepared to cope with, and what's beyond that? And that is a very value-laden conversations. And in the communities, everybody values different things, and what some people can accept, others will not. And this is another point at which we get stuck, and a lot of time is spent actually not arriving in very much solutions, while everybody is trying to jump to the end and actually identifying options and what we're going to do, because at the same time, climate change is happening right now. We are dealing with all sorts of disasters more and more frequently, and people want actions and comments. And then so we have got the National Adaptation Plan, and that provides us with a little box of 4 options that we can choose from, and that's what they usually are. But this process, as I tried to demonstrate, is very, very complex, very difficult to get through, in taking time, while at the same time having this urgency of having to respond to what's happening on the ground very quickly. So what happens in reality is that we then pick on things that we can do, and rather than worrying about the big picture and the big process, we jump into the solutions and what can we do. So this is an example of a dynamic adaptive policy pathway, which has got the, I think I can do this little thing. Also, this line here, oops, I'm not really good at it, shows us the thresholds, what bad looks like. So in this case, the water engineers have decided that the overtopping of 1 liter per second per meter was what we think is really bad, and we cannot make that happen. And they came up with the, oops, that's the wrong one. That's this one, an adapted design for protecting us from that risk, which will take us to about 50 sea level rise situation, at which point they will need to increase the wall by 60 centimeters, and that will give us a bit more time until about 1 meter sea level rise, at which point, again, we need to lift it up and make it higher. This is actually really good science, really robust. You take this in front of the decision makers, and they feel confident that they're spending the taxpayers' money in the right way. But what do we get at the end? and that's, some of you might have seen it. This came from LinkedIn. It has been traveling around. It's obviously not a real thing. It's a But it demonstrates that through this process, even though all the intentions were right, because of the reality of that complexity, it's really, really hard to get nature-based solutions in. That city would have been much better off with mangroves or, you're the experts. you tell me what would have been better there. But building the business case for nature-based solutions and getting it done quickly and providing the assurance to the decision makers that they need to justify their jobs to the taxpayers is much harder than actually doing a little bit of water engineering science and generating slides like this ones. It would be quite hard to do that for mangroves. So what I wanted to talk about to you is this project I've been involved in Wellington. Wellington was part of the 100 Resilient Cities program. It's a program where 100 cities around the world collaborated together to come up with the strategies of how they're going to respond to all sorts of shocks and stresses that they are facing, climate change being just one of them. And they came up with what we saw through this process. It was 3-4 years of working together, was that the nature-based solutions kept coming on top, and we were learning a lot from what was happening in nature, and we found that they were actually providing the answers to the city. And so I wanted to show you a few of those learnings and how they were implied and how they led to the actually business case for the nature-based solutions. So this is the definition of resilience that the program used, and what I want to draw your attention to is this part, the wording, no matter what. So resilience is not, when you're designing for resilience, you're trying to design for any shocks and stresses that might happen at any time. And that's how we deal with the uncertainty. And nature turns out to be really well adapted to being able to respond to any shocks and stresses, while at the same time providing a whole lot of extra benefits. And why is that? So when, as part of this project, we developed a screening process for initiatives and projects that could be implemented to improve the resilience of cities and communities. And we looked to natural ecosystems to learn what are the qualities of those systems that are really resilient. And as a result of that, we came up with these 7 qualities, which we then used to screen the project. And as you can see, when we started screening the projects, the nature-based solutions were scoring always very high, simply because they actually, that learning itself came from the nature. And then the benefits that come from implementing solutions that display those resilience qualities is something that we called resilience dividend. So this initiative was funded by Rockefeller Foundation, so you can imagine there's a bit of an American language that keeps coming up, but people in New Zealand really didn't like that term. We called it co-benefits instead. But I thought I'd leave it there because it just reminds you how to talk to the finance people as well. So here's the circle in the middle is the resilience framework that 100SC came up with, and it just shows you the different elements, connected elements of the urban systems, communities, which includes the infrastructure and environment, but also economy and society and health and well-being, as well as the leadership and strategy and connections within the town. And what we were seeing is that initiatives that were based on nature, like, for example, investing into nature-based urban drainage, first of all, they were designed to help with this infrastructure environment growing pains that we had, for example, flooding. But they were actually generating benefits all across the framework. And that's how we knew that they were resilient. And that's how we knew that they were hazard agnostic. They were not just designed to deal with flooding, they were designed to make the city better. And then at that point, I thought it's worth noticing that in that toolbox that MFP in the National Adaptation Plan provided us, this option of other accommodate is the one where the nature-based solution really fits. Just like in Bangkok, we need to learn to live with water, we need to learn to live with the nature as it changes. And so that some of that learning that came up from 100SC has been dissipated quite a lot in New Zealand, and I feel very rewarded to see that it keeps propping up in different policies that are being written. It's really, well, it pops up in the policies, but not always in action yet. So that's the movement that we need to see. But as you can see, there is actually a commitment to prioritizing nature-based solutions in our adaptation plan. CLC is Climate Leaders Coalition, so this is the business sector initiative, and people who want to participate in it and be members, they also need to commit to including the restoration of nature in their climate plans. So coming back to just talking about a couple of examples of how do you build that resilience dividend and how do you demonstrate it, just one of the projects from the resilience strategy in Wellington was about promoting use of ecological interventions in water systems. And that's what you do. I'm not going to explain it to you, but how we were justifying it was around carbon sequestration. That was benefit to part of the city. That was biodiversity gains, water quality. Obviously, the main reason why we were doing it was still the resilience to high rainfall and earthquakes. But there were also social and economic benefits that could be built at the same time, and that's why those projects ended up in the strategy, and it was improving their well-being, providing opportunities for connections, and reducing water infrastructure costs. And that was really interesting, actually, conversations about this last point, because a lot of people think that nature comes for free. And when the nature-based solutions are put in place, there is no operational costs. And then so we're just saying to them, no, actually, we're reducing those costs. They're much cheaper than operating pumps and pipes, but they still have costs that they still have to be maintained. They are still infrastructure. All right, another project I wanted to share is one that happened or is happening right now in Nelson. So I've had the privilege of being environmental manager at Port Nelson for a wee while. And while I was there, we developed a partnership with Cawthron Institute to restore the seagrass meadows in Nelson Haven. And here is Hugh Morrison, the CEO of Port Nelson, and me there incognito. We were burying tea bags in the mud among the patchy seagrass to see how fast they would decompose in that kind of environment. As you can see, the carbon storage in the seagrass meadows is actually much higher, twice as high as forest. And this is an interesting part about this. It's not about the sequestration within the plant itself, but within the soil. The presence of the plants makes the soil absorb the carbon better. So this is one of the reasons, this map is one of the reasons why Port wanted to invest in it. As you can see, the P&L is where the port is now, that is all reclaimed land, where very large proportion of the seagrass meadows used to be. And we still actually are quite unique in New Zealand. It's one of the healthiest seagrass habitats in New Zealand, but we have lost quite a bit. Cawthron was very keen to restore it and build the knowledge base around how to actually propagate the seagrass. I don't know if you know, but seagrass actually does flower, and you can go to seagrass meadows and collect the seeds and then grow them in the nursery, and that's what they're doing right now. But why an organization like Port Nelson would invest into initiative like this? And for them, it was to start it off with our climate strategy. They are a member of the Climate Leaders Coalition, and they recognized that they wouldn't be able to reduce right down to zero the carbon emissions, and they would need to offset, and they wanted to do it in a meaningful way. And so for us, the sequestration in the haven where we were operating was the best solution. But obviously there was a whole lot of other benefits that we could highlight that brought on board other partners, the Council and the Cawthron Institute. We actually got the forestry companies sponsoring that initiative as well. And that's all about the biodiversity, water quality. But it actually is also about the economic opportunities that this created. So there is obviously the economic opportunity of actually selling the carbon credits from that initiative here in Nelson and bringing money into Nelson for other conservation projects. And also for Cawthron, it turns out that there is an economic opportunity for them. They are hoping to shift this project into building a nursery in Nelson and build like a center of excellence of seagrass restoration and actually export it out around New Zealand and Australia. So really, really exciting. And I'm almost done. I'm not sure how much time I have left, probably not much. But I wanted to introduce you to one more concept, and that's ecosystem services valuation. So I realize that I'm about to open a can of worms here. People hate when you try to value nature. It's a very controversial topic, but it is one that does help very often to build business case for investing in nature. And I have been in situations where nature was valued zero because people refused to value it or said it was too difficult to value it, and therefore it was ignored and destroyed. So in the right context, it's okay to value nature. And there are actually, it's not very common in New Zealand at all, but UK is probably the leading market where we've got a lot of ecological economists that know how to do this. There's a lot of tools, databases, and methodologies that allow you to do it. There is a framework that traces from the ecosystem services, the things that nature does for humans that is of value for us, through to actual monetary flows and who are the beneficiaries, etc. And I just wanted to show you a project that was done in Coventry in the UK by my colleagues, where they wanted to introduce a sustainable urban drainage infrastructure into a street. Not really, nothing special, some trees, some green rainwater gardens, some rainwater retention and reuse. And they valued the project, the cost of project was 121,000. And then they went through the exercise of trying to estimate what will be the benefits. And obviously that was really hard, very controversial. In the end, they have a huge range from 900,000 to 3 million of benefits to various bodies that you can see up there at the top. But even with all of that uncertainty, it's clear that the business case, and not just hard, not just because it feels good, it actually makes a totally perfect financial sense as well. It would be crazy not to do it. All right, just to close off, I wanted to share a joke with you from the resilience crowd that I worked with for a few years. And we used to laugh at the emergency managers who always talk to us about our job is to prevent disasters. And we would say to them, well, actually, our job is to wait for the disasters to finally happen, because that gives us a chance to finally do something. And this relates to this idea of the evolutionary peak trap, that all the living creatures don't like the pain, and we resist the short-term pain and often because of that, never actually achieve that long-term game. And the disasters are the moment that that pain is forced on us and something needs to be done, and we have the opportunity to build better. And so the idea here is that I'm hoping people like you who really know how to do this will be ready when that happens to come up with the solutions, to come up with a business case, and use those opportunities when disasters happen from day to day to actually introduce those nature-based solutions into our spaces, because we really, really need it. So just finishing off with Winston Churchill quote, slightly paraphrased. Do not let good climate crisis go to waste. Thanks.